Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Unleash Your Voice. I am your host, Priya Sam, and today I want to talk about something that I see all the time with high-performing women. And it's this: you're doing incredible work, you're delivering results, you're trusted by leaders, and yet you're still being overlooked, not promoted, not recognized, maybe not paid what you deserve, not considered for the higher visibility opportunities that you know you're ready for. And if that's you, I want to offer you a reframe that might feel uncomfortable at first, but I promise you in the end, it's also going to be really empowering. You likely do not need to do more. You need to position yourself differently. And this is what I call the visibility gap. Okay, so let's define what exactly that is. The visibility gap is the gap between the value you are creating and delivering and how clearly that value is being seen, understood, and talked about by decision makers. Because here's the truth: decisions about your career, promotions, raises, opportunities, they're not made when you're in the room. They're made when you're not there. And in those moments, people can only advocate for what they can articulate. And if your work is living in execution but not in story, you become invisible really quickly. Not because you're not good, but because you're not clearly understood and your value and what differentiates you is not being clearly understood. So think of it like this: if someone says your name in a room that you're not in, and the response is, "Oh, yeah, she's great," but no one can really explain why, that means you're in a visibility gap because she's great doesn't stand out. It doesn't get you promoted or considered for bigger opportunities. It's forgettable because it's what people say about most of their colleagues. Oh, yeah, they're great, right? So the way you actually get those opportunities, the promotions, the raises, the way you stand out, the opportunities for higher visibility opportunities like, speaking at conferences and events or getting the opportunity to lead bigger internal and external meeting. Those things happen when in rooms that you are not in, someone says, "She's great. Did you hear about the presentation she did last week that led to that $1 million deal with Connects closing? She's great. She did a session at sales kickoff that blew everyone away. She's great. She created a new playbook for accelerating onboarding, and it's been a game changer for my team." But those stories don't come out of nowhere. You have to intentionally create them and give them to others so they can actually advocate for you. So that in those rooms, when someone talks about you, it doesn't stop at "she's great." They can actually explain why. And even better, if they have a specific story they can tell. So if you're hearing this and you're starting to wonder if you're in the visibility gap, I want to give you a few questions that you can ask yourself to help get some clarity. So you can pause and reflect now, or maybe just notice what resonates when you hear these questions. So ask yourself, number one, when my name comes up in a room I'm not in, what do people actually say about me? Number two, can my manager clearly explain my impact without me in the room? Number three, am I known for something specific, or is it more "she's great"? Number four, when I talk about my work, do I focus on tasks or outcomes? And number five, do I leave conversations thinking, I didn't say that the way I wanted to, or I know I'm bringing more value than I really let on in the way I answered that question or told that story? If the answers to these questions are a lot of, "I don't know, probably not," or "I think so, but not clearly," then you're likely in the visibility gap. And I want to remind you, this is not a capability problem, right? You know you are doing good work. It's a communication and positioning problem. And the best part is that that is totally fixable. I want to bring this to life for you with an example from one of my clients, because this is going to help you see what steps you yourself can take to get out of the visibility gap. Because when my client Michelle said this one sentence to me, it changed everything. So she came to me because she'd been at her company for more than 6 years. She worked in sales. She'd actually been promoted 4 times during her 6 years there. So she had a great track record. She was consistently going above and beyond. On paper, she was doing everything right, but she wasn't getting the recognition she deserved at this point in time. And the moment she realized this is when she found out something that hit her really hard. She started talking to other people on her team. People had the same title, same amount of experience. She found out they were getting paid more than her. And understandably, that shook her confidence. It left her feeling frustrated and demoralized. And honestly, I've been there too. So I really felt for her. The other thing that happened is other people on her team were getting higher visibility opportunities. They were getting asked to speak at conferences and events and getting put on some of the bigger accounts that she knew she was ready for. So when she started working with me one on one, the first thing we did is dig into what was actually happening. Everything starts with clarity. So oftentimes we have these symptoms, right? But we need to get to the root cause. Just like with your health, right? You might be experiencing symptoms, but you need to find out what's the underlying cause of those symptoms. So that's exactly what we did. And as we started going through, discovery, I was asking her different questions. She had, when someone gets that look just washes over their face, that light bulb moment, she just stopped and looked at me and she was like, "Oh, I don't think my manager sees me as underperforming. I think he just doesn't see me at all." That's the visibility gap. Because when her name would come up in rooms she wasn't in, people would say, "Oh, yeah, Michelle, she's great." But that was it. She actually even told me there were a few new people who started at the company and, you do like 15-minute coffee chats with new team members to get to know them. And she said, once I started asking her about, what do you think people say? She said, "Well, I actually had a few coffee chats and every person I talked to said, 'Oh, so many people told me how great you are.'" And she said, in the moment, I was like, "Oh, that's amazing. Of course that feels really good." But she said, like, once we started talking, she's like, "I did realize after, though, I don't think they could have said why." Right. So, of course, I don't want you to think it's a bad thing if people are saying you're great. That's good. But to take it to the next level where it actually has an impact and actually leads to you getting opportunities that you deserve, they need to be able to say why you are great. They need that story. So for Michelle, that's where it ended, right? She's great. There were no specifics, no story, no positioning. And great just doesn't get you seen. Specificity does. So when we looked at how Michelle was communicating her work, and I asked her a lot of questions here around, what do you tell your manager in your one-on-ones? Let's review your last annual review. At her company, she had to do a self-review. And what I saw was this pattern of everything living in execution. So during those one on ones and in her annual reviews, she would say things like, "I helped with X, I supported X, I was part of X." She wasn't using any leadership language, right? She wasn't talking about what she led, what gaps she identified, what changed because of her work and influence, or the impact that it had on the overall business. Her value wasn't missing. She was doing all of those things. She was leading projects. She was identifying gaps. She had a lot of cross-functional influence that led to processes changing. And she was doing work that directly contributed to business outcomes, but it was hidden because she was underselling herself. She was downplaying her own contributions by saying things like, "We did this, the team did this, I helped with this, I supported this." So there was a big language and communication shift that had to happen here. Now, we did not change a thing about what she was doing because her actual work was excellent. In fact, I encouraged her to step back from a couple of things that weren't connected to helping her get ahead. And she was experiencing some burnout here. So that was part of this shift. But really, what we really focused on is how she was communicating her value and impact. The first thing we did is identify three things that truly set her apart. One of them was leadership in creating repeatable processes, something she had done on multiple occasions after she identified gaps and recurring issues. She also had a lot of cross functional influence because when she wanted to change something, she needed to get people from other teams on board, especially when she wanted to build new processes. So, because she worked in sales, for example, one of the gaps she noticed was a knowledge gap between when the sales team would close an opportunity and then when the implementation team would take it and start implementing the customer. A lot of knowledge from the sales team wasn't being transferred to the implementation team. And so sometimes customers were getting frustrated because they would have to repeat themselves and, revisit a lot of the things that they had already discussed with the sales team. So Michelle saw that happening over and over again, and she decided to create a standardized form that every sales team would fill out in the handoff to implementation. But in order to get that process implemented to get everyone on board, she needed to have that cross-functional influence, right? She needed the implementation leaders to be on board. She needed the sales leaders to be on board. And she was able to do that. But what that looked like on her review was I helped implement a new process for customer onboarding, right? She didn't say, I identified a gap that was impacting customer satisfaction. And, I researched how other companies were mitigating this issue. Then I proposed to my manager this new process. And then my manager went to the sales manager and made the recommendation and then asked me to implement it. And then I went to the implementation leaders and got their feedback on what information was missing. Like she did all of this, but on her review, it just said, I helped with this process. So do you see how valuable it is to have the story? So that was the second thing. And the third thing was her institutional knowledge. Because she had been at the company for 6 years, she had a ton of institutional knowledge and relationships. So once we identified those three things that set her apart, the leadership in creating repeatable processes, her cross-functional influence, and the institutional knowledge, then we translated her work into clear strategic stories and really focused on that leadership language. So instead of saying, I supported this initiative, we shifted to I led a cross-functional project that resulted in X business outcome. Instead of I was part of the team that did X, we shifted to I identified a gap in the process and proposed and implemented a solution that led to a 70% increase in customer satisfaction. Same work, right? She was doing the same work. She was already doing all of those projects, but her visibility shifted when she learned how to articulate her contributions and their business impact effectively. This is what got her out of the visibility gap. So once we had done all of this foundational work, identifying what set her apart, building those key stories, I suggested she take a next powerful step. Take those stories, put them into a presentation. I helped her build a narrative that included micro stories, right? Shorter 2 to 3 sentence stories that really showed those three differentiators that set her apart in action. So remember, those were leadership in creating repeatable processes, her cross-functional influence, and her institutional knowledge. We had 2 stories, at least 2 micro stories for each one of those points. And then we crafted a message for her manager because I wanted to make sure she clearly said to him, I want to have a meeting with you to discuss growth opportunities. And this is really important for any of you who might be considering, advocating for a raise or promotion. When you want to ask for something like that, you don't want to blindside anyone. You don't just want to pop up a presentation in a regular one-on-one. You need to make sure your manager is prepared to have a conversation with you about growth opportunities or career progression, whatever terminology your company might use. So Michelle did this. We crafted this message. He agreed. They set up a time to chat. And then Michelle delivered this presentation that we built together. It was full of stories that made her value and impact undeniable. After the presentation, her manager said to her, I had no idea. I know you're solid, but seeing all of this in one place, wow. Let that sink in. She'd been there for 6 years. She'd had 4 promotions, and still, he didn't fully see her value until she told the right stories. That's a visibility gap. So then he said, can you give me this presentation? We're not in a promotion cycle right now. At her company, they did promotions twice a year, mid-year and beginning of the fiscal year. But he said, let me see what I can do. And being able to use this presentation and retell the stories you told me will definitely make it easier. This is a huge takeaway for all of you. Your stories don't just make it easier for you to advocate for yourself, they make it simple for others to advocate for you as well. And that's exactly what he did. He came back a couple of weeks later and offered her a promotion and a 12% raise off cycle. So if you take one thing from this episode, let it be this: you don't need to work harder. You need to make your work easier to understand, remember, and advocate for, because your career doesn't continue to grow, especially in senior roles, in six-figure and multi-six-figure roles. Your career does not grow because of how much you do. It grows based on how clearly others can see and speak to your value. Here's a simple shift you can start making immediately. Instead of asking, what did I do? Start asking, what changed because I was involved? Because when you say, what did I do? Inevitably, you start making a list of what you did, right? A task list. That is an entry level approach. When you are looking to be in more senior roles with more influence, you need to ask, what changed because I was involved? Because that is the answer that will create the foundation for a story that will help you to be seen for your value and impact. Then you can go one step further and say, can someone else clearly explain that impact without me? If the answer is no, that's your opportunity to craft the story you can give to others. And for those of you who are thinking, well, that won't work for me because I haven't truly led anything, I don't have a leadership title, I want you to think about speaking to the part of the project you were responsible for, the specific actions you took that had an impact on the overall outcome. Because remember, you don't have to have a leadership title to lead. If this episode resonated with you, I want you to really sit with this question. Where am I being undervalued simply because I'm not being seen clearly? And more importantly, what would change if that visibility shifted? Maybe you're like Michelle and that would look like a raise or a promotion, or maybe it would look like getting asked to speak at more events, internal and external. Maybe it would look like being involved in more cross-functional initiatives. There are so many different goals that you can have that visibility impacts, because I've seen this happen over and over again. When you close that visibility gap, everything changes. If you have questions after listening to this, find me on social media. Let me know what they are. You can find me on Instagram at Priya Sam, on LinkedIn, Priya Sam, and make sure to follow and subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. Until next time here on Unleash Your Voice, remember, your story is the one thing you have that no one else has. I'll see you next week.